And so, as we come in the remembering of the being that always is silent and still, simple openness, naturalness, it is to recognize the incredible preciousness of the silence that can so easily be overlooked, and to remain resting in the silence, in the stillness of being, as the aware being that is always watching what is moving and changing, but not so concerned with the moving, changing. Let the focus be with the openness, with the emptiness. It is to not overlook the emptiness, the silence, to recognize the preciousness of the silence, of the empty openness, because this is the being, the simple being that is the true essence nature. And the recognition of simple being is the recognition of the consciousness that is the true nature. And it is in the recognition of consciousness that we open to the deepest possible truth of being resonant light, luminous and radiant. We open to what the divine is, what God is. Nothing that the mind could imagine. We have to rest in the openness, in the emptiness, as consciousness that is only consciously awake and aware of itself, but not so pulled, not letting the attention get pulled by the moving, changing, the concepts, the ideas, and the beliefs. This is where the recognition of the emptiness and the openness has to not get filled with concepts about the emptiness and the openness, to not fill the spaciousness that is infinite, vast, with mental concepts about what awakening is, what the true nature is, what embodiment is, and all of this kind of nonsense that can be taken on board with the mind, right? It's to really guard the emptiness through being the emptiness. That being the emptiness, being the open, infinite being, is not an experience that comes and goes. What we're speaking of is the end of experience. That when we come to the direct experience of being, that we are directly remembering the consciousness that we are in truth, and we're no longer being pulled by the enticement and allure of more experience. The me loves experience. It's the perfect way to keep distracted and to keep the whole flow of the me and the protective egocentric behavior alive. It's very, very simple that emptiness is empty. Openness is ever open. The being just simply is. And it's so clear and obvious when there is a resting in the being, because there is a peaceful freedom in being the being. So we open in presence, as presence. Yes, we start being present, awake and aware to the moving, changing. But we come to recognize that as the awareness is aware of the moving, changing, so aware of the thoughts, aware of the body tensions and sensations, aware of what is moving and changing. And as there's an awareness of the moving, changing, the sense perception, the environment, it's like consciousness is attuning to a finer frequency of its own purity, away from the habitual attentiveness to the patterns of consciousness. The patterns of consciousness create the concepts and the beliefs and the sense of a me, the sense of protection and conditioning. So as we come to the presence and we're aware of the moving, changing, consciousness itself starts to still naturally through the attention of resting, and come to recognize that there is a stillness, an unmoving, undisturbed independence in the purity of conscious awareness that is never ever touched by the play of the world, never touched by the mind, the narrative, the stories, never touched by anything that moves and changes, and has never been touched. That there is a pristine stillness, a pristine silence that has never ever been anything other than itself, simple, silent being. And this is the true nature of all beings. It's one being that is shared by all beings. And so we are opening out of the sense of the personal, the divided, the limited, to remember the impersonal, undivided, unlimited. And that it is the end of experience. There's no one that can ever know this truth. This truth can only be known in the absence of someone. And that is why we speak, to start with, of the emptiness and the openness of being, and the importance of keeping the emptiness empty and the openness open. Because what we can be sure of is that those patterns of consciousness will try to come in and fill the space. And it is so habitual to fill the space with experience, with narrative, with more information, with seeming knowledge for the mind that loves to understand. But in truth, there is no understanding of this purity and immaculate being that we are. We have to let go of everything that the mind wants in order for the living truth to be remembered as what we are. That we are the living truth. We are a field of immaculate living truth, radiant light that is just resonating. And we are being invited through the dance of consciousness to let go of the limitation and the sense of personal, which is very shadowy, we could say. It's still made of light. It's all still made of light. And yet the light is not beaming its full radiance until the knowing of the fine frequencies of what we are can be lived and are able to flow, living as life itself in harmony and balance, and ever carrying itself consciously deeper into the incredible remembering of the fine and subtle purity of what we are in truth before the images, before the narrative, before the story. And no words can express this truth. No words can really express And any pointing can never be to the full incredible radiance. We can only enter into the radiance and allow the radiance itself, the luminosity and the fine frequencies of what we are as consciousness, to carry itself deeper and deeper, clearer and clearer into the ever refining remembrance of what we are and what this all is, and that it is so far away from what the mind thinks it is and what the mind imagines that it is. That we cannot imagine what it is to live as no one, to live as life itself. We can't imagine that with the mind. But when we really start to resonate as the emptiness, as the openness of simply being, we recognize there is nothing to do, no one to be, nothing to become, because what we are in truth is already here, and it's just overlooked because of this mental imposition that is constantly evaluating and seemingly controlling and curating what is happening in the life. But when we come to rest as the being, the recognition can be directly that there is no doer, there is no choice, that what is happening is just simply happening. And so the giving up of the attempts to do, to create, to manifest, to make intentions for what the me wants, all of it has to be let go of in a huge, profound surrender to thy will. And thy will is a surrender to the unknown, right? We have to surrender all concepts of what the divine is in order to know the divine. We have to surrender all concepts of what God is in order to know what God is. Because any concept about anything will taint and limit reality, right? So we have to illuminate as the awareness where there are concepts and beliefs and ideas, where there are desires and ideas of what is wanted, what we are opening to, because the whole thing of it is that we don't know what we're opening to. We have no idea with the mind what we are opening to, and we have no idea as the being what we are deepening into. We cannot know what cannot be known until you are it, right? So we have to just let go of all ideas and beliefs and concepts and knowledge, let's say, false knowledge, partial knowledge. What is useful about the knowledge that we have gained in the sense of the human life is nothing, right? Is absolutely nothing. The only thing about the knowledge that we have gained in the human life that is useful is the alive, awake resonance of recognition that happens in a moment of an alive remembrance. But what tends to happen is that something brings an alive remembrance, and we overlook the resonance of the alive remembrance because the mind says, oh, this is good. I want more of that. I'll read more, I'll watch more, I'll do more, right? So we completely overlook what is useful in general in the human life in order to gather knowledge and put it in our library of the me and what I know and what I've achieved. Whereas this unfolding, this flowering into true remembrance has to illuminate that nothing that we are holding as knowledge, as mine, as concept, has any use at all. And of course, the mind will never believe that. It's only through knowing this truth and being the knowing of the being that the releasing of the concepts, the beliefs, and the ideas can naturally happen. There's a natural falling away that happens. And the only way is in being the being. You know, the instruction of grace, the flow of grace is incredibly simple. And so we have to be very aware as well of how within the collective consciousness, there are many ways of trying to share this truth that complicate it, that believe that teachings and techniques are useful. And they have a use to bring us to presence. But there has to be a point where we recognize the presence of being and we stop being compelled by the me that wants to belong and do and believes that in doing we're going to go deeper, because that's the dream. That's the dreamer creating a dream that enjoys and wants to enjoy belonging and techniques and all of this kind of thing. So we have to see through that at some point and recognize that this is a solo voyage as far as any sense of what you are is concerned. It's a completely solo voyage. It's about being able to be so completely alone with yourself in order to find yourself, right? That the whole opening to the emptiness of being is about discovering the bliss in emptiness, discovering the bliss in simply being yourself, that has nothing to do with anyone else in the dream, has nothing to do with any of that. And yet, of course, as we open, we start to create a reflection that dances as companionship and support. But it's to never let that be an enticement that the mind is distracted by as any kind of experience, to only keep the focus with being the being and let life live itself. But don't let anything fill the space of your emptiness. Don't let your openness be cluttered with stuff and ideas. It's to keep the emptiness as the true silence of being, where there is an autonomy in the knowing of the being, a clarity of the being that knows itself and does not need anything else but the knowing of itself. And so the pointing is a constant pointing to this being that you are. Don't decorate it, don't adorn it, don't fill it with ideas about it. It's about being it so fully, living as an empty, open, blissful light that is luminous, transparent, free, right? Freedom is free because it's not bogged down with ideas about itself. And as soon as there's a recognition of anything attempting to fill the space, be willing to surrender that and clear that. Let it all go and just be empty. Because until we can really be empty and recognize the being that is the emptiness, is the openness, the simple being that just knows itself through being itself, we won't get to the refined readiness for the second emptying to happen. And the second emptying is the emptying of really all concepts, beliefs, and ideas in order to refine into the remembering of being the unified field of light that is so deeply saturated in the knowing of itself and only itself, that it opens into the second emptiness, which is the remembering of divinity, the remembering of God, of the real purity that is before consciousness, right? So we have to keep the space empty by refining and allowing everything to fall away, allowing all that we think we are, all of the personality, all of the persona, all of the ideas, all of the ways that we want to cling to being someone. When we're really serious about this, taking this all the way out of the dream, right? It's one thing to awaken in the dream and have lovely experiences of presence and expansion, and to imagine that that is it. But we have to realize that awakening, in a way, is the awakening of consciousness in order to awaken out of consciousness, in order to awaken out of the dream, right? To leave it all behind, leave it all behind, leave the dream behind, leave the dreamer behind, and actually really open to the glory of what this seeming human life is actually for, is to awaken to God, is to awaken to divinity, and that it's consciousness itself that is in an evolutionary process of awakening to itself. And it has created the whole human realm as a means to awaken to itself. So we are not to get stuck in our humanness and our ideas of how our humanness embodies divinity. We're not to get stuck in ideas and concepts about what all of this is, because they will only burden us and keep us trapped within the dream. And if we can really feel an impulse for freedom, alive, as a longing, as a call, as a real wake-up call, if this longing, this impulse is really true and ripe, then it will keep calling itself to go deeper, go further. Don't stop and imagine that you've got somewhere and get stagnant in the imagining of having achieved something and being someone that has got something. Don't stop. Don't stop looking. Don't stop being the empty, open awareness that is constantly looking to watch and catch where the someone is so ready to grow again and to reinvent itself as someone that has got something, right? We have to keep offering it all back, offering it all back, offering it all back. This is being the flow of surrender. This is being life, surrendering to itself and never taking a position or being as someone that has got something. It's about being this flow of life that only knows itself as the being and flows within itself to know itself. So we have to illuminate the habit to constantly want more experiences, right? To constantly want more experiences and enjoyment, right? And surrender that. Keep surrendering that through the illumination of that in order to guard the emptiness, guard the stillness, the silence of being. Guard the simplicity so that the bliss of being can flow, so that the bliss of being can flow. Because it is the bliss of being that flows in the emptiness, in the openness, is the nutrient and nourishment that carries us deeper into the refinement and the willingness and readiness to keep letting go of the concepts and the beliefs, the protections, the resistances, right? Now, life itself, flowing as itself, is acting, of course, as a means to bring in the appearance of everything that is needed to be seen. But if we fill our emptiness with the experience of life and a me and the personal, and imagining that this is my life and I'm going to make my best life, and decorating my life with things and experiences, we're filling up the emptiness, we're filling up the openness with experience, and the attention wanders then and gets stuck again upon the experience and wanting the experience to be a certain way, right? So as soon as that is noticed, it's to surrender it, give it back to God, give it all back to the unknown, and just be. Nothing needs to be known or understood. It's just to be yourself and to feel the freedom of simply being. Feel the openness, the timelessness of being the being that is infinite, eternal spaciousness. And to know that the mind knows nothing about this, and no doer is needed for this truth to be lived. That life knows how to live itself, because life is a flow of intelligence that is flowing within itself to know itself, and is constantly refining itself and purifying itself of discordance and patterns and disturbance that arise in consciousness, that is a natural part of this process of consciousness evolving to know its own divinity. So it's absolutely natural that the lived experience of life, living itself, will meet discordance and will move to harmonize and rebalance, because the collective consciousness is deeply in imbalance. And we could say we are the vehicles. Once we come to an openness of being, we are the vehicles that are transmuting the collective. And as we are transmuting the collective, we start with transmuting out of the sense of the personal to be the impersonal. And we transmute our sense of being someone that has these needs and wants and desires and concepts and beliefs in my life. We transmute out of that to be the unlimited impersonal. And then our whole lived experience is being life living itself, that is transmuting the whole collective. But we don't get burdened and bogged down with that, as long as we are living as the radiance. We are the ocean, the blissful ocean. And whenever we meet a disturbance or a discordance, we openly receive it, transmute it through the nervous system. We experience it as consciousness experiencing itself. And then as consciousness, we let it go, right? We don't hold on to it as a story, as a thing. Consciousness just lets everything go. It just experiences it, and it just shakes it off, just like an animal shakes off experience, right? We don't hold on. Consciousness doesn't need to hold on and gather experiences. We keep the emptiness empty. We keep the openness ever open. Whatever's happening, we keep the silence. through recognizing as the open, awake being that emptiness is always empty. The being is always empty. The being is always open. The being is ever free. So there's a natural recognition within the being. And so as this is coming forward, as these words are coming, it is not about the words or understanding. It is just about being, the consciousness that is resonating in recognition, and nothing needs to happen, nothing needs to be done. Where consciousness recognizes itself in the unseen, it starts to align to a finer frequency of remembrance, starts to naturally align, and the attention of consciousness that can dance as mind consciousness, which is more limited and patterned, so seems personal, starts to relax and soften into being the openness of being that is truly empty and can recognize the emptiness of just being. It's like we clean out the temple of silent being. We sweep it out. We sweep out all of the sense of holding on. We sweep out the concepts, the ideas, the beliefs, the stories, the sense of me. We just sweep it all out, right? We sweep it all out. And we're so willing to really to sweep it out so deeply that we cleanse it right back to the openness and the emptiness, where the resonance of silence, the depth and the texture of stillness is so rich, right? We sweep out the stagnancy, we sweep out the stench of the me, we sweep out the dross of the holding patterns, we sweep out the spaciousness of our being, and we remember how good it feels to feel clear and free and true. We don't hold on to any guilt and shame about having forgotten or got distracted, because guilt and shame are those linchpins of the mind, that way of holding on. I'm bad, I'm not good enough, I'm not ready, you know, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy of God, whatever. All of those linchpins around the shame. We don't allow any of that to hold back the cleaning out. And so the emptiness can be felt. And if there's anything that feels sticky, if there's anything that feels sticky or resistant in the clearing, the sweeping, we just rest as the illuminating presence with whatever feels sticky, whatever feels like it's holding on. We just rest in absolute presence without trying to change anything. We just wait. And we could say that these places in the sweeping, there has to be a readiness and a willingness for these places. We're not coming in with an excavator or a sledgehammer, right? We're not trying to chip away what's not ready. When we really speak of the first emptiness, the presence of being, the emptiness, the openness of just being, we're aware that there are still concepts and ideas and beliefs. But in the moment, here now, we're recognizing that the felt sense of being is not disturbed by anything. We recognize there can be residues lurking that are going to surface in their own readiness, but we just sweep the emptiness. we just flush it out through our recognition. We feel the freshness and the clarity and the freedom of just being in this moment, that we don't need to attach to any stories or narrative, that there's just a sense of being that's right here, just resting, where there's no evaluation, there's no following the narrative, there's no analyzing the moment, there's no giving meaning to anything. There's just being here, so open to the openness, like an availability to recognize and remember the freshness of freedom, the freshness of being yourself, to really have this openness to recognize, I am independent and free of the narrative. I'm independent and free of sense perception. I am independent and free of the character, of the personality. I'm independent and free of the whole story of the life, the roles, the past, the future. I am independent and free as the presence of being. And this is where consciousness consciously recognizes its essence nature as pure and simple and fresh. And just the recognition here is so fresh and so free, empty of content, because we're not focusing upon the content. We can recognize that the spaciousness of being is ever empty. When we don't focus upon the content, attention rests within itself, and the resting within itself is this fresh, open spaciousness that remembers itself as simply being, that just simply is. And there is such a beauty. And here you see the sweeping is this clearing of the cobwebs, clearing of the dust, the imposition of the mind, just recognizing that the spaciousness is ever free, ever fresh, ever clear. And you are the spaciousness, the infinite, unbounded spaciousness that is ever free. That when the attention does not glob on to the content, the recognition is, oh, I'm the open spaciousness. I'm not the story. I'm not the person. I'm not the narrative. I'm not the stress. What I am in truth is this silent, still, awake, aware being that is ever open, ever free, and ever empty of content, right? So the glory of recognizing the freedom. And here we find the peace, the deep, abiding peace of the true essence nature of what we are. Underneath, before the story, we discover the beauty, the freedom of the spacious, timeless, unbounded that we are in truth, right? So hear the freshness, hear the stillness, hear the silent peace of just simply being. That we don't need to analyze anything about the life. We recognize that what we are in true essence is utterly free of the story of me and mine. And we open in remembrance to this freshness, this simplicity, and just simply being. And in the openness and the emptiness and simplicity of being, the freedom is fresh, right? We don't need to fill the space with any sense of having got something or where am I, because any thought will float in let it float in, let it float out, right? Let the emptiness be so empty and free and flowing in the knowing of itself that whatever floats in, floats out, right? You're the space. Don't let the attention grab onto anything that floats in. Rest as the spaciousness, as the openness. Just be the silent being. Because as this silent being remembers itself within its own beingness, it deepens. There's a sense of expansion that comes because it's not an experience of someone expanding, but it's the freedom from being contracted that feels like expanding. But at a certain point, we're not expanding anymore because the constraint and limitation has let go into the unlimited. And the direct recognition is that you are the unlimited, boundless. You have no edges. You never have any edges. That any sense of constraint is when attention identifies with thought and the me and the narrative. But the true nature is ever free, ever unbounded. And so there's not really an expansion happening because there's just an opening through a sense of expansion to just be the boundless and remember that you are the boundless, infinite being, the timeless, eternal one that just is. And as the being remembers, the beingness itself that feels the direct experience of the infinite, timeless being, the beingness itself confirms its own freedom, and just rests luminously, radiantly in itself. And as it knows itself, it starts to feel a flow of aliveness, of dynamism in the knowing of itself, which is where we actually open to the true flow of intelligence of life, not my life, my story that's limited and seems to be personal. We open to the flow of life that is unlimited and impersonal and free and flowing within itself, right? So we rest in the stillness, in the silence of being. As the being comes to remember itself, we just wait here, ever open, ever free, empty, allowing the bliss and the peace of being. You know, the true bliss of being is the peace. It's in the peace. It's in the silent peace. The word anand, right? The ananda or the anand is really the peace. It gets translated as the bliss, but really it's the blissful peace, right? Which is the nourishment that happens in resting in the being, right? So the peace and the bliss are the same. When we rest truly in the peace, there's a flow of bliss, the flow of bliss, and the bliss flows within itself as the bliss of the being knowing itself. The flow of the bliss knowing itself is the flow of life, the true flow of life. The true flow of life is the flow of intelligence. It's impersonal and unlimited, boundless, and it's flowing naturally within itself in perpetual surrender into itself. Ever peaceful, ever awake in the knowing of itself, flowing within itself in a perpetual surrender into itself. And this is the true flow of bliss. This is where we meet Sat Chit Anand, right? The Sat is the presence of being, the truth, the unmoving truth. The Chit is the flow of the knowing. And when we're resting in the Sat and the Chit, the knowing of the being is flowing, the bliss of the Anand starts to be recognized as the taste, the flavor. And so really guarding the emptiness, the openness, and the bliss of being is resting in the refuge, the shelter, the sharanam of the Sat Chit Anand, right? And it's the graced invitation of the mother, of the mother of Shiva. It's the graced invitation to rest, to take sanctuary, to take refuge in Sat Chit Anand, and let the intelligence carry itself fully in the knowing of itself. Consciousness will take care of itself, that there's no doing involved. There's nothing from the external that is useful now. There's nothing in the external that is useful. Let the Sat Chit Anand Sharanam be the refuge where the intelligence of consciousness itself carries itself within itself in the absolute knowing of itself, that now the grace is flowing. Now we are in the river and the flow of grace, of consciousness flowing within itself to know itself, to follow its absolute unquestionable intelligent impulse to know the fullness of its divinity. Of course, consciousness knows intelligently within itself, within its own purity. It can taste and experience the impulse of its own divinity. And so it is naturally carried within the flow of that impulse to know itself. And so we have to let go of conceptualizing and trying to understand and be divinely carried, right, in absolute surrender of the me and the mine and the wanting to hold a position and hold on to and make something out of, right? Make a my life, my awake life out of the field of free impersonal awakeness. We want to guard the emptiness, the openness, and rest in the true shelter, the true refuge, the sanctuary of the Sat Chit Anand, where the flow can continue to intelligently flow, to deepen and refine itself. The refinement cannot happen if we are not resting in the being. The refinement cannot happen if there is a me that is trying to interfere and act as the master of of some kind of destiny for the me. It cannot work. It cannot happen. It can only flow within itself to bring a freedom from the personal and the identification and the story of me, right? So we have to really enter the flow. We could also describe this as we open to the Shiva, we open to the pure awareness, and we open as Shiva, and as we open in the pure awareness, the transcendent field, being the transcendent, we have to meet Shakti, because Shiva is never without Shakti. We have to meet in the knowing of Shiva, that Shiva is only here knowing itself. Shiva only knows Shiva because Shakti is flowing for Shiva to know itself, right? So we meet Shakti, we meet the flow of the knowing. And what we discover is that there's a refinement of the sense of me and my life, where there's a rebalancing that happens, that knows intelligently how each seeming individual is uniquely imbalanced in the human condition. And the flow of the Shakti of life flows intelligently to rebalance where there's an imbalance of too much Shiva, too much masculine, too much efforting, trying, holding, ideas and concepts, or where there's too much of an openness to be like a doormat and all of that kind of thing. Where there's this imbalance in the human life, the intelligence flows to rebalance the Shiva and the Shakti, to bring a rebalancing within the consciousness, this is how consciousness refines, to bring a rebalancing within the consciousness, within the sense of the personal gets rebalanced and refined out of the personal, where the rebalancing of the Shiva and the Shakti starts to bring a blissful remembering of union, right? So here we are again, the Sat Chit Anand, the Shiv, the Shakti, and the blissful union, right? The blissful remembering of the union. And the remembering of union is the remembering of openness of heart, the infinite, expansive, divine heart, the spiritual heart that is ever open, right? So we come to remember the union in our direct experience. The remembering of union is the remembering of being the being that is neither this nor that, right? It's not one or the other. We're not trying to rest as the transcendent. We're not trying to only be the open receptivity. We're finding the rebalanced union. We are it. We are it. Right? We let go into it. And we are this perpetual surrender of life, finding its rebalancing. And as the rebalancing happens, it refines the sense of me and my life and what I need to work on, or whatever seems to be happening. The refinement is the absolute luminous revealing of all imbalance. And of course, what is imbalance within the human experience? Imbalance is conditioning, protection, resistance. Even the laws of nature can be imbalanced and moving in conditioned, restricted ways. So this flow of life that we open to, which is the knowing of the being, the flow, it's so potent. The flow of the bliss is so potent. And only when we are resting in the being, as the being, in the knowing, and really honoring the emptiness and the openness of the being, can the can the true flow of life, the true Shakti intelligence flow to rebalance and carry itself to the remembering. And this is how the evolutionary impulse of consciousness flows within itself to refine itself, to bring about such a deep remembering of the purity that we open as consciousness. Consciousness itself opens to its own purity through a sense of being a unity, unified consciousness that's flowing as all of life. There's an opening in the saturation. In a way, it's like we devour, consciousness devours all of its programming and all of its flow, all of its life, all of its stuff. It devours itself in the remembering of its own purity. As it refines itself, it like consumes itself. It takes itself in. It experiences itself, tastes itself, and consumes itself in utter surrender, right? It devours itself. It has to devour itself. And as it devours itself, it remembers its pure essence, the source of the source, and it opens to the pure Brahman, God. It opens to its own divinity. It remembers its source before being conscious. And this is a purity of the oneness where the consciousness is not creating a self-referencing, but the knowing is so deep that the oneness is only one with no other, no second, just this. And the knowing here is the holiness of this. The holiness, the purity is divinity. The holiness, the purity of divinity is God, is the mother. No concepts, no stories, no narrative, no religion, no lineage, no teaching. Of course not. How could there be? How could there be if there's only one? How could there be anything other? It's the simple light and the finest frequency of this light, which is still in absolute perpetual surrender into itself, which is the power, the glory, the light frequency that creates the momentum for consciousness to be conscious, for the appearance of creation to appear, in order for the whole play to play itself out, the divine Leela, the divine play to play itself out. And so there doesn't need to be any understanding of anything that is being spoken, because the intelligence knows. The intelligence already knows. And that is the beauty of opening to be the being. And the flow of the knowing is that the knowing knows. And you can feel the resonance of the intelligence that knows and recognizes its own momentum, its own truth. It's not a spoken truth. It's an aliveness, it's a frequency. And the invitation of the speaking is to recognize the frequency and just resonate at the frequency of remembering. It's all that is invited, is to resonate at the frequency of remembering, which is where the being is being itself, the silence, the stillness, the peace. And in the deep peace, the flow of bliss starts to flow in the blissful, nourishing knowing of itself. And the nourishment, the nutrients, the nectarine bliss flowing within itself is what carries the consciousness into itself. It's the only way that the refinement can happen, is through being the being that is ever open, ever free, ever fresh. Now we can have experiences of opening, and the me can feel like, oh yeah, that was lovely. Now life is lovely because now I've had an experience of being open. And the me can try to live attached to an experience that's come and gone. And it might have left some residue of more clarity, but the me will usually then try to take hold of a past experience, right? Referencing past, because that's what the me does, references past and creates a context for a me that's in reference to a past. So that's why we're speaking of the ever openness, the ever emptiness of the being that isn't referencing past, it isn't creating a context for anything, because the ever present freshness of being the being is always now. There's only now. And as soon as we reference past and we start to reference memory, then we're in a kind of psychological functioning of the me that's holding a position and is contracted. So as soon as there's a noticing of this, we want to remember, through the resonance of remembering that we're speaking of, the peace and the openness of being the being, and opening to the flow of intelligence where refinement can happen. And now there's a natural deepening and there's a natural rooting that happens, right? A natural refinement of the frequency of remembering that can abide within itself, let's say. And the more that we gather and connect in this, remembrance, right? The consciousness refines and refines, and the nervous system refines, and the nervous system is able to hold the frequency, right? A nervous system that is not refined will not be able to hold a frequency of the flow of bliss. A nervous system has to be refined enough in order to hold, abide in a frequency which is the bliss of being. Before the nervous system is refined enough, there will be a sense of going in and out, which of course is what refines. But the more that we rest in the openness of being, there is a refinement that happens in the recognition, in that nourishing flow of bliss, the nectarine bliss that carries everything deeper, refines the nervous system. So resting, sitting, and let's say the techniques and practices that bring us to presence, can also support the refinement of the nervous system. They don't bring us to the openness. They don't bring us they don't refine us, but they support the possibility of being able to refine. Let's say techniques and practices are like pre-refinement. They're preparing the nervous system. They're preparing the systems that feel like the human body systems, because the human body systems that are relevant are the nervous system and the brain, and they have to be refined through like a physiological refinement and a subtle refinement in order for the frequency of pure consciousness and then the finer frequencies to be able to be abided in and received and lived, right? And actually lived. And be why when we have opening emergent experiences, that they can seem very expansive and sometimes discombobulating, because the nervous system is receiving a frequency which is much finer than it normally lives at, and the frequency will move to refine and bring that opening on board. But where there's not enough sattva and not enough purity, and the nervous system isn't refined, it won't be able to hold it, and it will find a way of integrating it, and it might feel discombobulated for a while. And obviously we have to support that when that happens, through knowing how to be with the finer frequencies, through not resisting anything that happens, because the discombobulation can be because the mind, it goes into fear or trying to understand and shuts down this natural flow. So essentially anything and everything that happens in the human life doesn't need to be taken care of through any kind of mental understanding or psychological functioning. It's all about being the being and surrendering all doership to the flow of intelligence that wisely knows how, and to just keep coming to the being. And the intelligence plays the part of bringing in whatever we need in order to refine, right? It's what brings in the possibility of learning to meditate and practice asana or tai chi or whatever it is that comes in, right? It's what brings in what is needed to support the refinement of the nervous system. But it's so important to know what is relevant and resonant, so that we don't get lost in the enjoyment and the experience of being someone that's practicing something, and we don't glob on to the experience. We have to recognize that all experience is a vehicle to carry us to be able to recognize presence, the frequency of presence, to recognize the frequency of being. Once we come to the frequency of being and consciousness is consciously awake in the remembering of itself, then everything is happening in the field of consciousness. And from here, we can speak about the whole way the play of human life plays, but we speak about it from the perspective of this truth. We're not speaking about it from psychological functioning and trying to navigate it within a limited context. We speak about it as flows of consciousness, as a divine play, as patterns of discordant consciousness that are in the process of refining, so that we can allow the patterns of consciousness to refine and come to the remembering of purity, so that the nervous system can refine and there can be an abidance in being the being, and live this freedom, live this joy, live this love, live this bliss that we are, right? That we can taste it, and the tasting of it makes such a compelling pull for it. It enlivens the longing for it, but only through being the being and really honoring the openness, the emptiness of the silence, of the silent being, that we don't want to keep overlooking or trying to fill the space. We want to rest as the openness, as the emptiness. We want to be the being that just is, right? So as the words come, it's all about resting in the recognized remembrance, in the frequency, in the openness, in the emptiness, the silence of being, and resting in the knowing of the being that knows itself and is flowing within itself to remember itself. There's no doing needed. There's just the resting, just the simplicity, just the naturalness of being. Always here now as the timeless, boundless one that just is.